Good evening and welcome to another podcast, yet another average podcast. Guys, we are here in the studio, excited to talk about tonight's topic. And of course, I've brought along my favorite guest, my co-host, Mitchie. Hello, Mitchie.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
You good? You recovering okay?
Good.
All right. All right. Mitchie's had a long weekend, but she has joined us here tonight and excited to have her along for the journey. So she is prepped and ready, and we're going to talk about, was the moon landing fake? What do you think of that topic, Mitchie?
I think we need to discuss that. These are our opinions.
Yeah, we'll get into that here in just a second, but make sure you talk up because that microphone's a little farther
Sorry.
away.
Is that better?
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay.
All right, so before we get into all the good stuff, let's talk about a few legal things here real quick. Just wanted to say that all the opinions, all the comments shared on this channel are just that, our opinions, based on our research and our thoughts, and do not reflect those of others, and nor are we trying to speak for anyone else. We are just simply having a good time chatting about these things after having done a little research and all that good stuff. So that's what I got to say about that. So now we're going to get into the good stuff.
All right.
Was the moon landing fake? All right. So at first glance, what are your opening opinions and thoughts on it?
Well, I don't even know why somebody thinks it's fake.
Right. So my initial thought is that's quite the conspiracy theory. How could it be fake? However, I'm going to go through all the reasons that people believe that the moon landing was fake, and we can kind of discuss them as we go, or we can, but
why even come up with something like that?
Well, you'll see, because there are some interesting facts.
Okay.
Okay, but first and foremost, I want to talk about July 16th, 1969. 400,000 people worked on the Apollo project. 400,000 people. So immediately I'm going like 400,000. That's a lot of people that are going to be hiding in a cover up. So, but more than that, 600 million people watched the moon landing live on television. They watched it live. 600 million people. All right, so let's talk about some of the motivations as to why the United States needed to go to space and land on the moon. What was the hurry? What was the big push? We're in the midst of the Cold War. Things are going on. Russia is beating us on all fronts in the space race. It's a bit, Russia was the Soviets were the first. They were far ahead of the U.S. in space technology. They were the first to put man-made objects in space, Sputnik. They were the first to put a animal in space, which was a dog, which sadly didn't make it. But then they followed that up with, well, one didn't make it. Let's put 2 dogs in space with a bunch of mice and rats, and they did survive. So then they came back. Soviets were the first to put man in space, first to put a woman in space, first multi-person crew, first spacewalk, first spacecraft to reach the moon, first pics of the far side of the moon, and the first soft landing and transmission from the surface of the moon. So the Soviets had been beating us on all fronts of the space race and getting to the moon. And it was critical that the United States showed their force and showed their power by getting a man on the moon first. And so everything was dedicated to that one thing: get a man on the moon, make it happen now. There were also rumors that Russians were going to put nuclear weapons on the moon, and so the United States felt like they needed to get there first, and they were under tremendous pressure to do so. So on July 16th, 1969, Apollo 11 launched successfully, carrying Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, and they flew off, went up to the moon, and 4 days later, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped foot on the moon.
Why haven't they been back?
We're going to get into that. That's a great question. Because, the question is, now that we can, why aren't we? But then there's a lot that goes into that.
Because there's hidden stuff on the moon.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of audio you're not going to be able to hear that you're going to wish you could hear, because I just
can hear it.
That. Okay, you can hear it? All right. Okay, so, all right. So let's go through some images and talk about reasons why people think that the moon landing was faked. Here is what we've got. So the first image is shadows, not parallel, suggest multiple light sources like lights on a movie set. Shadows with only one light source should be completely black, but aren't. And the reflection on the helmet appears to show movie lights, which I don't think I have that image. But as you can see here, the shadows are not parallel. That would indicate to me that there were lighting sources coming from two different angles, one casting a shadow this way, one casting a shadow this way. And if the moon only has one source of light, the sun, why are the shadows being cast in different directions?
So you mean they can disprove the space shuttle going?
You might have to talk up a little bit.
Okay, so you're telling me they can disprove the space shuttle going up, leaving like Earth, and you're telling me that this whole thing was a big O scam? Like they literally made something on TV to make it look like there was a spaceship going up in there?
So the conspiracy theory suggests that they did launch a rocket, just that it didn't make it to the moon. That they
Well, where would it have gone?
Just went into space and came back. But under the pressure that they were to be the first on the moon, the first to walk on the moon, they had to make it happen. So it leads down the rabbit hole of how did they fake it? So that's the shadows. Next up, we're going to have what we're looking at as a movie prop rock that was found on the moon. That's a photograph of a rock on the moon, and that has the big letter C on it, indicating that it could potentially be a movie prop.
We got a moon rock.
Got a moon rock
with
a C on it?
I don't know. My dad said that one was some gold over there, and that one was from the moon.
Okay. All right. So next up we have the mountains do not appear miles and miles away. So here's the interesting thing. There are two pictures that you see here. You have this picture, which is 2 miles closer to that mountain range than this picture, which had let's look at it again. So this picture is 2 miles closer than this next one with the lunar module in frame. So based on that, those mountains look like they're in the exact same spot, right?
Right.
So the idea is movie set, movie mountains, kind of a backdrop on a stage, and let's see, because the pictures are nearly identical in both of those, but one was taking 2 miles closer to the mountain. That makes okay. So this next one, let's see here. I might have these out of order. No, I don't. Okay, so the next one up here, this is what the stars look like from the surface of the Earth. Now, when you're out on the moon, there's no stars. Why are there no stars in the backdrop of the pictures taken from the moon?
Oh.
I mean, if they're that easily seen in in the evening nighttime under our atmosphere, then why do we get no lights at all or no stars at all on the surface of the moon?
You might get some, but maybe they're not. I mean, I don't know. They're farther away, or there just wasn't any in that path line. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so the next thought, or the next reason people think that it was a conspiracy theory, the lunar module engine puts out 3,000 pounds of thrust, and the moon surface is covered in fine dust and powder, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why is there no mark on the moon on the surface of the moon where it landed? Why are there no dusts on the legs of the lunar module? There's no disturbance to the ground at all. So here's a picture of the spacecraft. You would think that there would be dust. Maybe
because there's no air.
And you would think that there would be dust and even a crater where the 3,000 pounds of pressure coming out of thrust coming out of that lunar module landing on the surface of the moon. Why is there no disturbance to the ground underneath it? Very odd, right?
Not really. I mean, there's no air. There's no.
Okay, but even if there was no air, if you had a big flame shooting down that was thrusting you, that was controlling your movements, when it hit the surface, it would displace anything underneath it, right?
I mean, I guess, but like it wouldn't. It's not just a dust
It's like
planet
a
or dust
fine
moon,
powder, according to
but
the.
it's also a crater, so it means it's made out of something hard. Not
Well, they
made.
didn't land in a crater, but I get what your point is. But yeah, well, we'll get on to it. We'll get through this.
I don't
'Cause
know.
there's
That's
some
past
more.
my pay grade.
Yeah, I know. There's some more. There's some more.
But you're telling me they're disproving it by photos. That's really it.
Well, no, there's more stuff here. I'm only a fraction of the way through some of the things. Next up, we have when the lunar module separates when it launches back away from the surface of the moon, going up to. Here is a video of that. So here's the lunar module. It separates and goes back up into space.
Yeah.
You don't see any thrusters. You don't see anything. Looks like it could be being pulled up by a wire. Pretty, it's a little bit, and who's controlling the camera, right? So the camera's got that perfectly centered, perfectly framed, but everybody just left the surface of the moon. So who's controlling the camera?
The robot.
A robot? For 1969. But
If they can create a space shuttle, I don't see why they couldn't make a robot. They could.
it maintained perfect centering, followed it all the way up until it was out of view, and then returned to the surface of the moon. So, videos of astronauts walking on the moon. Here's some video of astronauts walking on the moon. Does it look like they're standing up, or are they being pulled around by a wire?
Like they're trying to stand up.
You want to see it again?
Sure.
All right. So here they are trying to stand up.
Yeah.
Could they be being assisted by a wire? See,
No.
like on a movie set?
No.
Okay. All right. No convincing Mitchie here. So let's see.
I just find it hard to believe. I get it. And I get it, but there's just.
Let's see.
It's hard to believe that when they came up with something like this, that they thought that we didn't land on the moon.
Well, let's see if you got something for
I
this
don't know
next
who
one.
had enough time to think that we didn't.
Let's see if you got something for this next one. Let me exit that. Why are we froze on? Okay.
Or not.
All right. Oh, why? Okay, there's the chat. All right, I can see the chat.
I can too.
I couldn't there for a minute, but now I can. Okay, so the next one is the flag. The flag on the surface of the moon. Why does it wave? Why does it wave like that?
Yes, indeed. They got the flag up now. You can see the stars and stripes on the lunar
Gravitational pull.
There is no gravitational pull on the surface of the moon.
Right?
Right?
Why would it be? Why?
So why would the flag be waving?
Well, they have solar storms. Like they have storms from. So like it could technically cause.
I would say there's no atmosphere on the surface of the moon. That would not be exactly correct. There's more scientific terminology for it. There's a very, very thin kind of something, but it's not an actual atmosphere. So there's no wind, no gravity, no anything like that. So you got that.
Yep.
Next up, we have the spacesuit that they wore. Here is a picture of the spacesuit. If you can see there, the shoes on the spacesuit.
Yep.
They don't match the prints left in the moon sand.
Well, it's possible that they might stand. That looks more like the top part of his foot because he's probably.
That's an empty suit. That is just a suit laying on it. There's nobody in that.
I know, but I mean, if you look at it, it looks like the top part of like a shoe, not like the bottom half, like where there'd be a heel.
So
it looks like they were standing, like walking almost like on their tiptoes.
That print looks like they're walking on their tiptoes?
Kinda.
I'm saying there's no lines in the bottoms of the shoes that correlate with the lines in the print on the bottom of the shoes.
I'm saying that one looks sus.
That's the actual Apollo 11 spacesuit. No question about it. That's the actual.
Well, maybe
Apollo
they have to
11
put their
spacesuit.
moon boots
Confirmed.
on. Maybe they got moon boots they got to walk in. But hey, I did want to let you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
the moon has gravity.
Well, okay, but we're not talking about gravity. Why would gravity make the flag?
I don't
The
know.
only thing that would make the
Okay,
flag
this
wave
is
would be
literally
wind.
past my like knowledge here. Okay, so I'm
Yeah, it
going to
would be
say this.
wind.
When I type that in, is there gravitational pull on the
Of course,
moon?
there's gravitational pull. That's what
Well,
keeps it in
well,
orbit to the Earth and around the sun.
well, then there's got to be some type of wind.
No, there wouldn't. There's still no wind because there's no atmosphere. So there's no weather.
I don't know. Well, okay, so let's put it this way. When you jump in space,
No gravity.
there's no gravity, so you
Well,
move, right?
Well, there's gravity, but there's less gravity.
It says
Correct.
1.62 ms, whatever.
Correct.
Okay.
That's why you kind of float when you jump.
Well, then that's the same thing as a flag. It's going to do this number because it's not touching the ground except for the pole. It's going to do this number.
It actually, under the conditions of the surface of the moon, it actually will not move at all. We'll get back to that. We'll get back to that. Okay, so.
Well, you asked me a question. You got to answer that.
Well, and I'm going to. We're going to get to it.
I know, but you got to get. Okay, but you talked about it. You should answer it.
We're going over all the reasons that people say the moon landing is fake.
Okay.
We'll get to the reasons
all
why.
Right.
Okay. All right. So next up, we have crosshairs. So on the cameras that they used on the moon, the lens had crosshairs embedded onto them. So you see crosshairs in every photo that you see from the surface of the moon on July 20th, 1969.
Okay.
But
what's crosshairs?
Oh,
Sorry.
You'll see it in this next one. It's basically they were put there so that they could frame the photo. They could put the right perspective, the right frame, and for putting pictures together so that they could anywhere they're markers that are put on the lens of the camera.
Okay.
So here's an example of a crosshair that appears to be behind the object that that was there. So which means that the photograph was taken and then that object was put in place there using some sort of Photoshop or whatever Hollywood stuff that they would use back in the day.
They were that good back then, huh?
Yeah.
They had the quality to be able to do
I
that.
mean, there's some great movies came out of the 70s. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, A Space Odyssey, which we'll talk about here soon, is why.
And they couldn't have a robot?
Is why people believe that a certain individual was responsible for filming the fake moon landing. Okay. So, all right. So moving on to the next one, probably the biggest one, the biggest argument for why. Well, let's talk about something else real quick before we get into this one because I don't have any photos or anything on this one. The surface of the moon, the temperature on the surface of the moon during the day is over 250 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay.
Number one, how did the astronauts handle that? 250 degrees. You couldn't survive in those conditions.
Their suit?
And, which maybe it was the suits, okay. And wouldn't the film in the camera have melted? But yet we have thousands of pictures.
Well, they probably use the same stuff on the camera equipment as they do on the actual space shuttle.
Okay. On the space shuttle? Okay.
What right. Spaceship?
Or on the suit.
Whatever.
Or anything. Okay. All right. So 250 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface of the moon during the day. Now, at night, it gets like double that negative.
Mm-hmm.
It's freezing cold temperatures, like beyond freezing. Okay, cameras had crosshairs. We talked about that. All right, so next up, what we got to talk about is one more thing we get there before that. So the footage we see from the moon landing, the original footage that we see,
okay.
The TV studios, we saw it all, 600 million people watched it on TV, right? Well, of those 600 million people.
Were you one of them?
I wasn't born yet, sweetie. 600 million people watched it on TV, and the news agencies wanted a live feed from space. They wanted a live feed from the shuttle, but NASA wouldn't allow it. So what they did was they projected their feed onto a screen, and then news agencies recorded that screen. And that's what we got to see, was the moon landing as recorded by NASA, projected onto a screen, filmed by the TV studio, and then publicized to the world, right?
Right.
which is weird because why wouldn't they just do a live feed? I don't know. But what's even weirder about that is the original moon landing tapes from NASA, the original ones, were erased and reused. There's no original footage of the moon landing.
There is probably.
Not original footage.
Probably
It
locked
was
up. Probably
erased
locked
and
up somewhere.
reused. Why would they erase and reuse footage of the greatest accomplishment of mankind at that time?
I got it. You want to know why?
Sure.
Because they found something they didn't want the people to see.
Well, we'll get back to that.
Well, you
Faux
keep
show.
saying that.
I know.
I don't like that.
Well, that's kind of where we're going to get to on the end of this, because that's going to lead into future episodes of the podcast here. So, all right. So the biggest thing here is a gentleman by the name of, what was his name? Can't think of his first name here real quick. Let me find it.
Jeremy?
Huh?
I was just guessing a name.
No, his name's not Jeremy.
John?
All right, so this is the Van Allen radiation belt. These are the Van Allen radiation belts. They are, they are a belt of radiation that just outside of our planet in space, there's this belt of radiation. The radiation is, when first detected, it was believed to be, it was so highly, there was so much radiation when it was first detected. They believed that a Soviet nuclear test, they had discovered a Soviet nuclear test in space. High energy radiation can penetrate spacecraft, disrupt instruments, and are lethal to astronauts. Let's see if I got anything here. Best way to protect the human body from high levels of radiation is a lead shielding, but even a thin layer of lead would have been so heavy the shuttle would not have been able to get off the ground, right? So,
So you're telling me that the moon is radiation?
The best they could do was thin sheets of aluminum, but aluminum melts at 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. The electrons in the Van Allen belt have energies of millions of volts, which would equate to 10 million degrees Kelvin. So would not stand a moment of heat from aluminum would not last under those temperatures.
It's because they didn't use that type. They're using the type that they found on Skinwalker Ranch. That one, like the one where
like
it's
the
like
Area 51 kind of.
Like
metal?
You remember, and like they dug up that.
Yeah, but they couldn't have had that because they hadn't.
How do you know they didn't have it?
Because this was the first time man landed on the moon. We had only been in low Earth orbit at that time.
Yeah, but haven't you seen like what's that contacts, like where they got like the information from radio transmission of what kind of material they needed and blah blah to make this like special spaceship. I'm just saying, think about it.
Yeah.
What if the government, I don't know if there's a special word I'm supposed to use for that, but what if those people have a special material that they've been able to make and they say it's aluminum. I can never say that word. Aluminum.
Aluminum.
I said it right.
Aluminum foil.
Where's my hat anyway?
Yeah, I know. I didn't make my tinfoil hat yet. Okay, so there are all kinds of, and for whatever reason, I don't have them loaded in. But there are all kinds of. Interesting.
What's that guy's name?
Something Van Allen.
What is it?
I don't know. It's something Van Allen. That's
Van
why they're
Allen.
called the Van Allen radiation.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't know so.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of, gosh dang it, I don't know why I don't have those, but somehow, for some reason, I don't have these loaded in here. But there's all kinds of video clips of astronauts in space talking about how they look forward to the days when they could figure out how to get past the Van Allen radiation belts so that they can explore beyond Earth's low orbit, so that they can actually go out into space past the radiation belts and then explore what's out there in the universe, because what they're indicating for whatever reason is that we don't have the technology to get through the Van Allen radiation belt. Well, if that were true, then how would we have ever gotten to the moon? Because the moon is far outside of low Earth orbit. The moon is far away. So they would have had to pass through the Van Allen radiation belts in order to do so. I might have to do a video on this to highlight those things because for whatever reason, I don't have them. Well, let me see if I've got them in here.
What do you need?
Let me see if I've got them. No, I just don't flat out don't have them. I took video clips of all the astronauts talking about the days when we'll be able to travel past the radiation belt. And that was long after, years after we went to the moon. They're talking about, I can't wait until we're able to do it, even though, based on what we know, we already have done it. We've gone to the moon, right? So I'll just have to do something, a video or something later and talk about those things. But so the question is then, if they can't get to the moon, then how are they going to fake it? I mean, what are they going to do in order to convince everybody that they actually landed astronauts on the moon? So who would they have called?
Ghostbusters.
Not Ghostbusters. They called Stanley Kubrick.
Like
One
my
of the
Stanley Cup?
greatest directors of the 70s and 80s back then. Wrote some of the best classics still to this day. 2001: A Space Odyssey came out before the moon landing. They were very intrigued with the special effects that they were able to use in that movie about space. So they approached him about faking the moon landing is the story. And then, because he was under all kinds of non-disclosure acts and couldn't talk about it or admit it or anything else, which he's never admitted to it, he then went through in his famous 1980s movie, The Shining, which you know well, because we love that stuff. Mm-hmm. He put all kinds of hints in the movie to indicate that he had something to do with the 1969 moon landing, lunar landing. And we start with...
I don't know how that had anything to do with the moon landing.
It started off with, right here, on the wall, they look like little rockets. Little homage to sending a space rocket up. So, see those rockets there?
They look like arrows.
The Indian wall hangings and the Overlook Hotel look like rockets launching. That's what those were. You want to see it again?
Yeah.
There it is. Rockets launching.
Yeah, I'm looking.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. So then the next one up, the pattern on the carpet when Danny's playing in the hallway looks like the Apollo's launch pad. That looks like the launch pad at where Apollo 11 took off.
Okay.
Got it. All right. Then in that same scene, Danny wearing his Apollo 11 USA shirt, showing the space rocket.
Yeah. I think people look into things that I think it's odd that people do that. They have this theory and they literally find one little thing and they're like, they fly with it.
This isn't one thing. This is many, right? Okay, so here it is, room 237. So as Danny's walking down the hallway, he finds a room that's slightly open. He's been told not to go in it. In the book, it's room 217. In the movie, it's 237. Now, Mitchie, how far away is the moon from the Earth? 237,000 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I literally knew that, so thank you.
Well, I'm just sorry.
You just went ahead and answered for me.
Got a little excited, got a little ahead of myself. But the point is, why would he change it to room 237 from 217, which is what the book states? If he wasn't giving a nod out to...
All movies do that. He
wasn't giving a nod to the moon landing. All right. Then we have... is this the last one here? Yep. Last one here is the famous, we got the typewriter there next to you. Mm-hmm. See if I can get a picture of it there. Yep, there it is in the background. We got the typewriter there, and in the movie The Shining, he spends a significant amount of time typing on his typewriter. And what does he type?
Red room.
He types all work and no play.
Oh, all work.
Jack a dull boy, right? Right?
Yeah.
But how does he spell all? He spells all with A11, a nod to Apollo 11, the rocket that sent the
He liked
astronauts
Apollo
to
11.
the
He wore
moon.
the shirt.
So, all work and no play. All is spelled A11,
I thought the.
giving a nod to Apollo 11.
How do we know that the L key just wasn't busted on the typewriter?
Or
How do you know?
Or that's what an L looks like on a typewriter.
But is the only difference from the book, from the movie, the number?
There are more things that are associated with the moon landing in The Shining, but it was a long list and some of them were pretty far-fetched, so I left them.
I mean, some of those that you said seem pretty far-fetched.
Maybe so. Maybe so.
You should have just went with the rockets and left the rocket photo on the wall.
Later, there was a video released. It was actually a documentary-style video of Stanley Kubrick admitting to hoaxing the moon landing. Right? This gave credence to the conspiracy
Was something
theorists.
wrong with him?
This gave credence to the conspiracy theorists, and they ran with it. Only one problem.
Do you have footage of this?
Yeah, and there's only one problem with it.
It's not an original.
It wasn't Stanley Kubrick. The video was a hoax. So the hoax, so somebody pretended to be Stanley Kubrick with the help of his friend, and so whatever. It wasn't real, and therefore everybody who believed it was wrong.
Like I said, they see one thing and they go with it.
Yeah, so that is the evidence for why the moon landing is hoaxed. And next we can get into some of the counterparts to that and why the people who believe this conspiracy theory is true. This is the evidence for why. This is the evidence opposite to what all evidence we just gave, right? Okay. All right, so the soil on the surface of the moon is full of tiny beads of glass and metal, right? All of them reflect light, and they all reflect light like tiny mirrors. This is why shadows aren't all black. This is why there are no stars in the pictures. This is so it's so bright on the surface of the moon, especially in daytime.
Like when it snows.
Correct. Similar to when it snows and the light reflects. You can get a sunburn skiing down a mountain, not from the sun overhead, but the sun reflecting off of the snow below you, right? So that's exactly what that is. And because they're made up of that and they reflect, it's so bright on the surface of the moon that the shutter speed had to be set so high, so fast, that to let the least amount of light in so that they could expose a picture without burning it out completely. That is why you don't see the stars in the sky.
That's what I'm saying. People that do that type of stuff, they don't have any knowledge of any type of like the moon's type of surface or like environment or what would happen to a camera with that, with the heat and the brightness and everything. I mean, so I'm saying people pick something to go with it.
So similar to what you would see at a baseball game, which would be this. The ball and the lights, right here at the last minute, no stars in the sky, right? You don't see any stars in the sky, and that's because the light coming in to the camera kind of blacks out the background. So that's why you don't see anything there. The same backgrounds are simply because the lack of the atmosphere. So when we talked about the mountains in the background here, like this, we talked about that. The backgrounds are similar because, again, this was something new to me. I actually had to do the research to find out. But because there's no atmosphere on the moon, it's hard to judge distance. So the way we tell distance is because within our atmosphere, a heavy atmosphere like on planet Earth, there is a thick layer of atmosphere and it's hazy and so how we tell depth perception is based on how much of the atmosphere we have to look through in order to identify how far away something is. That doesn't exist on the moon. So whether you're standing here with the lunar module in front of you or 2 miles in front of the lunar module, the mountains look very similar in distance from the actual camera. So it's literally just a lack of atmosphere that gives it hard to give any kind of depth perception. right? You're looking at it almost like in 2D. So that's why the mountains look similar in the background. Cameras taking the pics on the moon have a very fast shutter speed due to the brightness on the moon because of the large amount of lights and quick shutter speed. No stars seen. Did that one, talked about it. Lack of blast crater under the lunar module. Because theoretically, in all seriousness, if you had thrusters lowering this down to the surface of the moon, and the surface of the moon is a powder, it is a very fine dust, then you would have some massive disturbance on that landing. And in Apollo missions following, they did have some of those. They did have dust up on the limb, that kind of thing. But what happened is the most obvious scenario, which is when you're coasting down to the surface of the moon, when you're 10, 15 feet from the surface, you shut it all off. And then you coast gently down to the surface of the moon. So when it actually landed on the surface of the moon, there were no thrusters, right? So therefore, there was no disturbance in the soil. And they landed in a very hard area of the moon where there wasn't a lot of dust and this moon powder. So you didn't get all that kind of kickback and stuff that people would have expected.
Put your papers down for a second.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's just put your papers down for a second. Okay. When you heard that people thought that the moon landing was fake, did you even question it at all? Like question, well, maybe it wasn't real. That because somebody said it, or
No, I've always believed the moon landing was real. Now, I do understand that there was evidence why it was faked, and I do understand that in 1970 and in the 80s, that evidence might have been more credence to the conspiracy theory because we didn't know all the things that we know now with advanced technology. So back then, I might have believed it, but at this point in time, I think it's been pretty well debunked over time that they can prove that people landed on the moon. I mean, at this point in time, you can shoot a laser to the moon and it'll return back to you based on stuff that's been left behind on the surface of it. So, I mean, to me, now, could that all be fake? Could all that be? Absolutely, I guess it could be, but we'll get to our opinion as to what we think.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're good. So that's the lack of the blast crater. Landed on hard surface of the area of the moon, which is why there was no dust or powder in the legs, no disturbance to the surface of it. Because there's no competing force to stop it, like on Earth, an object like a flag takes a while to stop moving once it's disturbed. So when they planted the flag, they had to twist it back and forth into the ground, right? So they're planting it in the ground. So that's where you see some of the flag. But also in a vacuum, as in space, if you recreated that in a vacuum, then if you shook the box or the vacuum, whatever, the flag would continue to move longer than it would on Earth. Huh?
The canister?
Yeah. It would continue to wave longer than it would on Earth because there's no competing forces to make it stop, right? And then if you had on Earth, you would have other outside influences like wind and atmospheric pressure, that kind of thing, that would also make the flag do various things that it might not otherwise do in space. So the reality is that the flag doesn't wave. When nobody's touching it, it stands perfectly still. Just like in this video here. Nobody's touching the flag. It is standing perfectly still the whole time. Camera that captured the lunar module liftoff. It was just manned remotely from Earth, or maybe, yeah, I guess, or the spacecraft. I don't know. But yeah, it was just on a remote control. That's why it held center and followed it and all that stuff. Although it does look a little janky. But something I read something about the thrusters, the gas that's used to ignite and fire somebody off of the surface of the moon, the chemical mixture, you would be able to see faintly in Earth's atmosphere, but it would actually be like a clear flame. You wouldn't even be able to see it, which is why in that blast off from the moon's surface, you can't see like thrusters or flames shooting down from that lunar module. The shoes on the spaceship, the shoes on the spacesuits. You nailed that one, Mitchie. They put these boot covers on over those shoes, and the soles of those shoes are absolutely the markings on the surface of the moon. So there you go. The temperatures are hot on the moon. That is true. 250 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. But with no atmosphere, there's no convection. So if you think about an oven, there's no convection. The bright white, like in the spacesuits, reflects most of the energy away, so the heat was not an issue for the astronauts or the film in the camera, simply because they were bright white, no other reason. They reflected the majority of that light, that heat away. There were protective barriers on the rocket, as well as insulation built into the flight suits to help protect them from the radiation. So, on the Van Allen belts, that's also true. There is high amounts of radiation in the Van Allen radiation belts that could theoretically kill a human being in moments under the right conditions. In this case, they were prepared for it by radiation protection on the outside of the spacecraft, as well as the suits had built-in lining that protected it from them. But really what it came down to was the radiation belts are not, or the radiation belt is not the same thickness all the way around. There are thinner spots and thicker spots depending on where you are. So the trajectory that they launched the Apollo 11 spacecraft, they launched it through the thinnest side of the radiation belt. And between that and the high rate of speed in which they traveled right through it, so they just go through it fast, minimize the amount of radiation that was taken on by the ship as well as the astronauts, and got them through. Now, the technology that they used doesn't exist now. It's not that they couldn't recreate it, but they destroyed it, and it would cost a lot of money and a lot of time to rebuild it. But the reason for that is because they have no more plans to go back to space or go back to the moon. Unfortunately, what happened in 1969 after the people landed on the moon was the hype was over. Like, we accomplished the goal. And so we had all this massive attention, all this excitement for the space program, and all this funding for the space program. But the moment we accomplished the goal of putting a man on the moon, it all just went away. And the space program just started to slowly die off. Even though we sent a couple more missions, we scrapped 17, 18, and 19, and 20, or I don't know. So the 3 or 4 moon landings later in the Apollo mission, they scrapped because it was just over. There was no public interest in it anymore, and there was no reason to spend the money to go back to the moon. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think because they have like robotic things now where they're able to land a robotic where it can just drive itself around. There's no need to actually send people. But then why do we still put people in the space station?
Well, so understanding, so space is still an important part of the advancement of technology, right? And there is still interest in it, but the moon specifically, they just gave up. But what happened too, in order to try to drum up more public interest in the space program, the Challenger, they put a school teacher, the first non-astronaut, space astronaut, military, whatever, they put Krista McAuliffe in the Challenger as a way to, kind of recreate some excitement about the space program and putting up somebody in space that's not an astronaut. And unfortunately, we know how that turned out in that Challenger. I can remember to this day where I was the day that Challenger launched. Was sitting in a classroom. It was huge news, and we had the tragedy that happened with the Challenger mission. So that set us back as well from a lot of our space travel and investigation. There's still a lot to be learned in space, and so we still do that. But the risks that it would take to put somebody back on the moon again, there's just not enough. There's not enough reason to do it until they look at starting to transplant, human life over onto the moon or whatever. But before they do that, I think before we ever return back to the moon, we'll put the next mission in sight, which is to land on Mars.
I thought they put a thing on Mars.
So we've got rovers on Mars, but we don't have remote operated equipment, but we've never had a person step foot on the surface. And so I think that will be the next space race.
But they have found other planets that are like closer to Earth and more viable than Mars.
Not closer to Earth. I mean, they're in completely other solar systems. They're farther away than our furthest planet. I mean, Mars is the next planet in the. Huh?
That's disturbing. If you're telling me that we're able to see so far into another solar system,
we can see,
but we had trouble landing on the moon.
Well, seeing a galaxy from a telescope, like the Milky Way, but a different one, being able to see that through a telescope from the surface of the Earth is not as great a feat, in my opinion, as putting a human being on the surface of the moon, flying him in a rocket, launching him into space, going through the radiation belt, separating from the main ship to land a secondary ship on the surface of the moon, launching it back off, reconnecting with the original, and going back to the Earth. Or I built a telescope.
Looked easy on Space Cowboys.
Or on...
that was such a good movie.
Yeah, or the asteroid movie. But so, the interesting thing is this. I'm going to play you a clip because and you won't be able to hear it. But the question becomes, the final question that I wrote in my notes was, so did NASA put a man on the moon? And the answer is, yeah. Or at least I believe so. What, you believe so too, right, Mitchie?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but the secondary question is...
So basically, let's just recap this real quick. And I can put this real quick. So you're telling me, because some people saw some photos that made them question that they didn't even know about camera, like the cameras and exposure and everything else like that. And then you're telling me that then they went as far as creating this whole thing where that one guy that made The Shining came up with all, and then they see, it's almost like you see the number 6, you're going to see it 6 more times today. So you're going to point it out and everything. So you're telling me they went through all of that and come to find out they were wrong, but why make why make that up in the first place?
But not everybody believes that they're wrong still to this day, A. And B, it's a compelling argument. It is hard. So there are no stars, right? There are no stars. The flag does wave on the surface of the moon, but we know why. But not everybody believes that reason why. Not everybody believes the reason why there's no stars in the atmosphere. Not everybody believes that the mountains aren't identical, because they do appear identical in pictures that were taken 2 miles apart from each other. The lack of a blast crater in the surface of the moon, no dust on the legs. I mean, when you put all this together as one, it's a very plausible, believable thing. And with the technology and the things that we can do in Hollywood, and we were doing back then, it's believable that that could have been done in a movie set under the pressure that the U.S. felt to get it done. They were going to stop at no cost to make sure that they put the first man on the moon, even if that meant they had to fake it. That's the thought process.
But my problem is that people, okay, let's say they made it up. Let's say they made it up and they just told us that because they felt like they needed to be first, like cheating in a race. Why does it matter?
Life is driven by competition. What are you talking about? Why does it matter?
I'm not a competitive person.
I mean, everything is driven by competition. In fact, the fact that we haven't gone back to the moon is because there's no competition to get back there. If all of a sudden
there is stuff on the moon,
some foreign country started building bases up there, and we needed to get there to do something before they did, we'd be putting men on the moon right now.
They haven't even explored like the whole moon, though.
Well, that's where the ending of this comes.
Kind of like they haven't explored all the depths of Antarctica or South Pole, wherever we were watching about. Like, it's kind of like they haven't ever. It's possible they have a huge bunker on the other side. We just can't see it.
The gear that they would need in order to land on the dark side of the moon is uniquely different than the gear that they would need to land on the light side. It's 250 degrees Fahrenheit on the hot side, or the daytime light side of the moon. On the dark side of the moon, it's colder than you could ever imagine.
Well, and you also have to remember
the conditions are completely different. Would require different material.
The problems that, so I remember, and I don't know the exact numbers, but like, I know that the longer that you are in space or landed on the moon or anytime you're in space,
okay,
it's like your bone density is like diminishing because like you literally lose like your bone mass or something like that.
There are effects from being in space, yes, but there are also people, but it's not so dramatic that it would. I mean, people have lived on the space station for years.
Yeah, and they come back and they've lost bone density.
Yeah, I get it, but it's not like life-threatening.
All right, so go ahead and show me what you were going to show me.
Well, so the bottom line is that did we land people on the moon? Yes, I personally believe that we landed people on the moon. That it happened. I don't think it's far-fetched, and anybody out there who's listening that might believe that the moon landing was a hoax, I don't discredit you. I don't either. I think that there are a lot of odd things that are hard to explain, but I think if you get into the head of a scientist and you do the research, that you'll find, if you trust and believe in the science, that we did land a man on the moon, and all those things can be explained. But that's just my thought. Don't hold me to it. The last thing, though, is NASA covering something up on the moon? Is that why we haven't been back? Is NASA covering something up on the moon?
It doesn't have to be our NASA. It could be anybody's NASA.
And to that, I say, I think possibly. I quite possibly think that, yes, they are. Now, this is a clip from a scientist who worked on the program, or was in the space program. It was a military guy. His name was Carl Wolf. And I'm going to play this clip for you so you can hear it for yourself. Mitchie, keep in mind the audio is still going from your microphone. So if you talk, then we won't be able to hear this. All right, here we go.
My name is Carl Wolf, and I was a precision electronics photographic repairman with a top secret crypto clearance. In mid-1965, I was loaned to the Lunar Orbiter Project at NASA on Langley Field. I was taken into the laboratory where the equipment was malfunctioning. I couldn't repair it in the dark. I asked to have it removed. Airman second class was in the dark room at that time. I was also an airman second class. About 30 minutes into the process, he said to me, in a very distressed way, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And then he proceeded to put photographs down in front of me, and clearly in these photographs were structures, mushroom-shaped buildings, spherical buildings, and towers. And at that point, I was very concerned because I knew we were working on compartmentalized security. He had breached security, and I was actually frightened at that moment. And I did not question him any further. And a few moments later, someone did come into the room. I worked there for 3 more days, and I remember going home and naively thinking, I can't wait to hear about this on the evening news. And here it is, more than 30 years later, and I hope we hear about it tonight. And I will testify under oath before Congress that what I'm saying is the truth.
And that is what he had to say. That is Carl Wolf.
I think alien spacecrafts land on the dark side.
Willing to testify to all the things that he saw, all the things that he witnessed, all the things that he knows about the moon and the things that happen on the moon. And then, are you ready for this?
Ready?
Carl Wolf was mysteriously hit by
They
a
all
car
do.
and killed before he could testify about
They
what
all
he
do.
saw on
I've
the
told
moon.
you that. Every time that somebody is going to go testify in front of Congress.
So that brings up to mind, what is on the dark side of the moon? Did they find things on the moon while they were there? If you believe that they did land on the moon, which I do, now that we here on Yet Another Average Podcast have determined that we agree that the moon landing was real, the question then becomes, what did they find on the moon, and what's really going on up there on the dark side of the moon? So, any thoughts on that before we carry on, Mitchie? Yeah, I think that'll be a fun and exciting one to get into. We'll have to cover that topic at some point in the near future. But I do want to talk about some other things real quick that we have upcoming on the show. Next week will be our first live stream with a guest. Next week, B for Brandon. Brandon will be joining us from his channel, B for Brandon. And we are going to talk about cursed movie sets. Now, I've brought Brandon on because he is an expert in all things cursed movie sets. He's done a few of those videos on his channel as well. We'll talk about him and all the things that he's got coming up on his channel next week, next Sunday when we go live at 7 p.m. Central, talking about the cursed movie sets of The Exorcist, Poltergeist, The Omen, and Jaws. Those are the 4 movie sets we're going to be talking about. And were they cursed? We're going to show you evidence as to why we believe they were cursed. And so that's what we got coming up here on Yet Another Average Podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's content, where we talked about the dark side we talked about the moon landing. And whether
we didn't talk about the dark side.
We'll be talking about the dark side of the moon.
I stayed focused.
There are a number of topics we have coming up, from cults to lost treasures. One of the ones that we're talking about, there is a poll up online right now on our YouTube channel. Go check it out if you want to vote on it. But it is for our next topic after the first movie sets. Right now, in the lead is Area 51. And the
I
things
also
behind
still have one I want to talk about.
Okay, Area 51. The other one that is on there that we'll be talking about in the near future is the Knights of the Knights Templar, and who they really were and what they were really about, and where is the story behind how their treasure came to be and the curse that went along with it. And that will lead into a part 2, which will cover the Curse of Oak Island, which a lot of people are excited about and asking us to do as well. So all those things are coming up right here on Yet Another Average Podcast. Mitchie, I would like to thank you for being here tonight. I know you had a long weekend, but I am grateful for you being here. And yeah, you got any final parting thoughts before we go?
I know what I want to talk about.
Okay, what topics do you have on your list?
I want to talk about, I'm drawing a blank, but I'm going to just explain it. You're going to know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Okay, the Catholic Church down below.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I have to do research on that.
Well, you do research on everything else. Why not that?
Well, I will, but I'm just saying that I don't know. I don't even understand what you're talking about when you say that. What secrets are hidden in the under Vatican City?
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that. I'm not familiar with those stories. I do know the one about the projector that can look into the past and see.
There's a good.
So we could definitely do something on that.
But there's been some things that have came out where,
I mean, to me, it's just a bunch of paperwork and old stuff and
so
is
just landing on the moon.
Yeah, well, so that we'll look at covering that. I know that one that you and I have talked about in the past, and we would be a fun one to talk about because there's multiple stories. Reincarnation There are some great stories about reincarnation where people were born and they remember their previous life. And that's a weird one. And there are a couple of stories that go beyond that whole, like, I'm 5 and I've now forgotten everything and I'm just a normal kid. There are some that
That's
go
more
on
spirit,
years
but
into adulthood.
and there's different types of reincarnate.
Well, and so that'll be the topic of one. Also, the story of the one of our inspirations on this channel is Mr. Ballin, and he does some great content, awesome storyteller, and he does a number of videos. One of the videos he's done recently was about a guy who went to bed in a remote village. His only source of transportation was a bicycle, and he woke up over 500 miles away 9 hours later. And there was no way for him to get that far away in 9 hours under the circumstances it was. And then it happened multiple times. So that's a great story. I want to find some other stories similar to it so that we can put that into a video as well, or a live stream, and talk about all that kind of craziness. But there are tons of topics that we're going to get into. Lost treasures. We have more cryptids to cover. We have more, I think I said cults and conspiracy theories that turned out to be true, and all kinds of things like that. So I cannot wait to get into it. I see a comment in the chat about Skinwalker Ranch. 100% there will be a episode on Skinwalker Ranch. Might even
And I'll
talk
get to pick
about
some too.
Skinwalker Ranch, and also Blind Frog Ranch, and also the other one. Can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, Mitchie, where that was less alien skinwalkers and more treasure, where they built a missile site next to Area 50. Anyway, we'll talk about all those things.
Oh, with Babe,
Yeah.
and her husband.
I just can't remember the name of that mine. But anyway, we will definitely be
It's not
covering
Dutchman's
Skinwalker Ranch.
It's not the Dutchman's tribe.
Because why, if you're gonna have a channel like this, why would you not cover Skinwalker? And there's a lot to talk about on Skinwalker. So definitely gonna have that coming up. That being said, everything covered. If you have any thoughts and you want to leave us a comment below, if you are watching live, thank you for being here. If you are watching after the fact and want to leave us a comment or give us a suggestion, please do so down in the comments below. And also be sure to hit the like button, and then also subscribe while you're down there, and then turn bell notifications on. That way you know every time we upload a new video or go live. We do plan on going live every Sunday at 7 p.m. If I can continue to restrain myself to that schedule, I will. I would love to add an additional second night of the week where we go live, but it'll just depend on a lot of things, scheduling and so forth. So if I can get enough guests and topics to talk about, which there's thousands, we will do that. We'll go live more than one night a week.
Self-control, Jeremy.
But yes, my plan all along was to go live 2 nights a week. I just don't have the schedule built for it yet. So we wanted to start out with some videos and some live streams and move on and progress from there. So thank you all for being here. I do truly appreciate it when you are here with us live and talking in the comments. Even if we don't get to your comments, we see them and we appreciate them. So thank you for being here. And that's pretty much all I know. So for now, that's what we've got. The moon landing, hoaxed, faked, or actually happened. That's my thought. It actually happened. So thanks for watching, and we will
see you in the next one.
Oh yeah, we will. Have a good evening, guys. Enjoy your week.